Good evening, everybody. Welcome you all to our third series of virtual lecture series in general surgery. Uh, Thank you all the speakers as well as the chairpersons for joining in. I'll ask Dr. Niranjana Agarwal, our president, to say a few words before we start the program. So, Dr. Niranjana Agarwal, over to you.
Thank you, Rajesh. Good evening to all of you. This is the third series, as Rajesh had said. Every Friday, 9 p.m. onwards, we are trying to revise the entire syllabus of surgery. And today's topic, which could interest everyone, is urinary catheterization. And it is not how to catheterize, but what are the newer things in that. Dr. Mukund will be talking on that. Daycare surgery has taken leaps and bounds, and none other than the president of the Daycare Association and even our immediate past president is going to talk on that. And lastly, what incisions, etc., and what positions are described in the surgery. Dr. Chandrakant Savli is talking. The next Friday, we'll have very important sessions on ergonomics in laparoscopic, the energy sources, and the sutures and staplers. And the top people in those fields are going to speak on that. So again, a request with folded hands that whenever you get this message of this program, we would request you to share with your PGs and UGs also, so that even they can get benefit of this lecture. These are more or less theory lecture with practical inputs in them, and wherever necessary, what is the latest guidelines available. So please share your this program with your PGs, UGs, and your other colleagues. And at the same time, I would like to thank Zuventus Pharma for graciously agreeing to support this academic activity for the full year. So every Friday, the Juventus Pharma is doing this program for us. So we thank them also. And with this few words, over to the two chairpersons today, Dr. Manmohan Kamath and Dr. Radha Verma. Rajesh, you can introduce them and we can go ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Radha Verma is a very good friend of ours, is a hard worker who's been day in and day out working for our Mumbai Surgical Society. I can vouch and say that she has added up so many members for Mumbai Surgical Society. Radha Verma is an excellent surgeon. She was a head of department in a medical college and just resigned a year back. She is our executive committee member of MSS. And of course, Dr. Manmohan Kamath is head of department of general surgery, minimal invasive surgery, is at Nanavati Max Super Specialty Hospital, and is a vice president of MSS now. I'll ask Dr. Radha Verma and Dr. Manmohan Kamath to take over the proceedings and start the program. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. So we have just changed the sequence of the lectures. So first lecture will be taken by Dr. Naresh Rao. He'll be talking on the daycare surgery, and being the past president of the Daycare Association of India, I think he is the apt person to talk. So I think let us not waste time in the things, and let us begin with the lecture. Dr. Naresh Rao, please.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kamath. Boys and girls, I'm going to just run you through quickly on the concept of day surgery. But before I start, I must thank the office bearers of Mumbai Surgical Society. And this is the first opportunity that I have of presenting day surgery in Mumbai Surgical Society. So with this, we'll start. So we see this and we realize that we are doctors. We do not believe in prophecies. We are people who are scientific, and we believe in more and more of scientific data. A little bit of history. We always see this photograph of Shushruth performing an ear surgery, which is quoted several times, which was supposed to be day surgery at that time because of lack of hospitals and not very good anesthesia. In the other picture, you can see the person with a hernia stress, hernia dressing. He's been operated and ambulated back. So these were the ancient pictures found in the history of ambulatory surgery. Well, in the modern context, the first scientific presentation was in 1909, more than 100 years back. by Sir James Nicol, from the Surgery of Infancy, Glasgow, which was presented in the British Medical Journal, where he said that a mother of average intelligence assisted by an advice from a hospital nurse, the child fares better at home than in the hospital. So that's very true. So what is day surgery? It's the discharge on the same day of surgery or procedure, not requiring overnight hospital stay is all. That's all the day surgery is all about. To elaborate it, it's a established norm of dispensing quality and affordable surgery to patients in the general population. These surgery do not require overnight hospital stay. This is a definition which is given by the International Association for Ambulatory Surgery. However, they require a complete setup of the operation theater and a few hours of observation. The recovery time is cut short due to the advancement in technology and the better availability of drugs. There are different names: ambulatory surgery, day cares, 23-hour. The Americans call it major and minor ambulatory surgery. One-day surgery is what the Britishers use. And India, we know it as day care surgery itself. As a general surgeon, this is my list of most of the cases. I've just picked up the first 20 that I do maximum in a year. And as you can see that some of them are intermediate, some of them are minor surgeries, some of them are major surgeries, but they all go home on the same operated day, morning till evening. So how is it possible? It's because of the advancement of technology, better availability of anesthetic drugs, superior quality of suture material, and it is now more acceptable due to its high safety. So technological advancements is something that we have always been touched. I am very fascinated by this picture of the Sadhu Maharaj talking on the phone. So we all take technology in our stride and move forward. So does surgery itself. There are protocols which are prescribed internationally and followed all over the world, and so do we in India too. It entails patient selection, preparation of the patient, most importantly, the counseling, which gives the highlights, the advantages as well as the disadvantages. You discuss the types of anesthesia that is possible. There is a discharge protocol. There is a backup which is given to the patient, and there is a team which gives a backup, and of course there is a follow-up. So these protocols are all set. I will not go into too much of details of this, but anybody who wants to know more about it can always send me a message and I can talk to them. So when we look at the criteria for day surgery, these are self-explanatory, what you see on the screen: medically unfit to be discharged on the same day, mentally not stable, suffering from highly infectious disease or upper respiratory tract infection, infants and children, babies less than 6 months old, and people requiring extensive monitoring, long distance from home, shock, fever, and so on and so forth. So you will ask me, what are the advantages? Well, it avoids hospitalization. It allows you early recovery and therefore early return to work, which is very important in nowadays. And there is, because you have the options of different types of anesthetic blocks, so it's a shorter anesthesia and therefore lesser side effects, reduces hospital-acquired infection, which is a tremendous issue all over the world. And we spend billions of rupees in trying to tackle this hospital-acquired infection. Patients recover faster in their familiar surroundings. It is a no-brainer. We all know about it, especially in the extremes of age. It is definitely less inconvenient to the family members and friends and relatives if you are home on the same day. And also, Sone Pe Suhaga, it reduces the time as well as money. So anesthesia is very important in this. I personally use a lot of local regional anesthesia, and so do the proponents of day surgery and people who use it. They are very simple anesthetic agents. They are mixed in equal quantities. You use the finest number of needle that you can get your hands on. You get 27G and 26G long needles, and Be very, very careful to have an anesthetist with you if you're doing a major surgery or an intermediate surgery. Apart from lumps and bumps, the OPD procedures, always have an anesthetist giving sedation or what they call it as a short GA, just so that you are able to give the block. Now I'll show you a small video clip, which I'll run through quickly. All these calculations are available on the internet, but you can be sure that if you keep well under the toxicity dose, it will be enough for your surgery. So we use a 10 cc syringe with a lever lock with 27G needle, 1.5 inch long. A little bit of recap. Sorry, something went wrong there. So a little bit of recap on the anatomy there of the inguinal block. So this is the anterior superior iliac spine. 1 centimeter, 1 finger breadth medial and below is where the nerves come in. And you see the needle is so malleable, and I am continuously moving. I am injecting right just below the sheath. Ten cc's of the mixture, then at the suture line, then at the pubic symphysis to prevent any crossover fibers. We proceed as soon as you have the sheath open, inject a couple of cc's there under the sheath. So in case if the block does not work completely, it will work now. Open the sheath. And again on the cord structures, before you start manipulating and pulling out the cord, you just inject a few cc's there at the pubic tubercle, and you are through. So pilonidal sinus is another case which used to be very frightening to me. Patients lying on his stomach. This is the field block. You strap the buttocks, you give a diamond-shaped injection all along the subcutaneous plane of the patient. You need to get used to this needle because it's quite malleable and soft. And initially you might waste a couple of needles, but it's still worth it. Patient is sedated. You can, if you carefully watch, you can see his buttocks are flinching. So he's not totally knocked off. He's breathing on his own. Followed by, once you're finished with this block, you give it on all 4 quadrants and you connect them. You do your discynogram, and then you follow the principles of surgery, an eccentric incision, you do the lifting up and suturing in 2 layers and whatnot. Most importantly, for most of our surgical skills is the pudendal block, which I have shown several times. This is a classical pudendal block, which I've been using for 30 years now. All these blocks we have been using for so many years. Niranjan also knows, we have all been trained in the same unit. And for anal surgeries, patient in lithotomy position, midway between the ischial tuberosity and the anal verge, the direction of the injection should be towards the hip joint. Well lubricated finger, you can gently put it in. Patient is under sedation, and you can feel the ischial spine, and then you start injecting midway there somewhere. I bend the needle a little bit so that the direction is perfect. And again, I'll be constantly moving up and down. See, what happens is this, with such a fine needle, the damage to the nerve or the vessel is negligible. There's several questions and several times we have been asked, don't you cause a hematoma or damage to the nerve? Mind you, I have never seen it so far. Maybe if you follow a few safety measures, it is possible for you to avoid such damages. And the same thing on the other side. There are several modifications of this pudendal block, but the basic idea is to see that the block is complete And believe me, the sphincter relaxes so beautifully that you do the procedure, you do not lose the anatomical structures there. I mean, it doesn't become patulous. The tone is maintained, and you can proceed with the surgery. You wait for a few minutes, and you will see that the anus relaxes in front of you. And one finger, two fingers, absolutely no effort, no resistance. This is all pudendal block. And this speculum walks in, and you proceed with your surgery. So there are some concerns and some complications that we are worried about. We usually don't see them, but toxicity of the local anesthesia and anxious patients, I mean, they can all be overcome by sedation. Always have an anesthetist with you. Do not try to be heroic and do some procedure without the anesthetist. Keep well within your toxicity dose. If you are not sure, calculate it. And like I showed you earlier, you can divide it into two. You can give the lignocaine first and then followed by bupivacaine afterwards. So the action is different. Lignocaine works almost immediately with or without adrenaline, 2% solution, followed by 0.5% bupivacaine or 0.75% ropivacaine, which works for a longer time but takes a little longer to act. The injection in infected area, you stay away from the infected area. Failure of blocks, yes, you will see in the initial stages. That is why you have to have the anesthetist with you so that he can help you. Techniques you learn. Your anxiety is something you have to deal with. Nerve damage can be avoided by moving. So is with the hematoma, as we have all taught, aspirate and then inject. But believe me, when you aspirate with the 27G, you don't get anything in it. And it's very rarely seen that there is a systemic absorption. If you do not want the tissue to be bruised or necrosis, stay deep. So coming to our scientific presentations and data, Sherlock Holmes said, data, data, data. I cannot make bricks without clay, which means, my friends, that we need to collect more and more information and more scientific material of our routine work. And I will present to you just to show what we have been doing at my day surgery center. It's a very simple and very, it's nothing phenomenal. It's from 2008 to 2019. As you can see, the day surgeries have been 45.9% with a readmission rate overall of 0.3%. So readmission is supposed to be a complication because there is some sort of a complication and the patient is readmitted. But over a period of time, you come to know how to select the patients, how to deal with the complications, how to teach the patient how to take care of the complication if there is anything at home, and you have a successful practice. So when you discharge the patient, there is a protocol that is to be followed. Patient has to be fully conscious. See, there is no gold medal for sending a patient home and saying that maine to ghar bhej diya aaj. No. If the patient is, your safety and your patient's safety is most important, you have to be, not even a 1% chance that the patient is not doing well. Don't take it. Let him rest that night in your center. You can have a skeletal staff at your center who will look after you. Don't need to have an RMO at night, but a trained nurse and a ward boy is enough for you to manage the patients at night. Usually patients are settled. They are there only for observation. So you need to see if they are hemodynamically stable. There is no giddiness. They're able to walk without support. They're able to take without. See, post-operative vomiting and nausea is the main pitfall for all surgical procedures, whether it is the indoors or whether it is a day surgery. So you need to be very vigilant about it. Patients having passed urine wherever it is relevant, somebody responsible to take the patient home, and no complications. You select or choose the complications. For example, in piles patients, if there is a bleeding, or if in a hernia patient, if there is a hematoma formation. Yesterday, I had a patient who had postoperative hematoma after 8 hours of surgery. I had to take him back and re-evacuate. So that was a failure, but that will come in the next year's statistics. So these things do happen, but that doesn't mean that you give up. The patient is fine, he's gone home today. So as you go home, which means that as the patient goes home, you need to give written instructions. You need to give verbal instructions to all those who are present. I usually like to talk to the patient at the end of the day before I leave the center, when he's absolutely conscious and when he has his relatives there to take him home. My nursing staff gives the instructions all over again, but I personally give that. All the contacts are given. Any questions, we are open to answer them. We see for complications. We teach the patient to look for complications and instruct them how to manage. For example, if you have bleeding, just take a pack of ice or just take cotton, press it for 10 minutes by the watch, it will stop. So those type of reassurances have to be given, and they work. And involve the referring doctors, involve the family physicians if there is one, to tell him that साहब आपका patient surgery कर दिया है, ठीक है, घर गया. Now you take care of him, make a home visit. He is also happy, and the patient is also reassured. A very important slide on insurance. This is something that even now in 2021 we are talking about insurance. As you can see, this letter which I had written, I had got a reply actually from in 2006 from the IRDA, which recognized day surgery as a procedure, and slowly we gave them a slogan: due to advancement of technique and in a specialized center, you do not need to keep patients overnight. It took me several years of correspondence with the IRDA, but finally in 2011, these policies were giving out day surgery procedures, and in 2015 onwards, you will see each and every insurance company has a huge list of day surgeries, which I have not given them. God knows where they have got them from. I have given them just a limited one, but they have added many more to it. So it is still not forced. It is still prospective. It is still something that we can choose. There is a lot of laparoscopic work that can be done as day surgery. Gynecologists do it, plastic surgeons do it. Why should general surgeons lag behind? So, concluding few slides, day surgery is a concept which is evolved out of necessity of economics, of time and money. It's not a gimmick. It provides high quality surgeries at an affordable cost. To my mind, it's mother of all surgeries. It involves all surgical specialties and interventions. You can run through 10 surgical specialties, which has got something or the other which can be contributed to day surgery gamut. It uses minimal dissection. It uses laparoscopic surgery, minimal invasive procedures. It is economical on time and money. It picks up the best of technology that is there to offer. And the anesthetic drugs are so good nowadays that they can be used. They are doing TAP blocks for cholecystectomies. They are using so many different types of spinal anesthesias for spinal surgeries, and sending the patient home for prosthetic surgeries and sending the patient home on the same day. So these are some things which we are still far away from, but it is being done in several other centers outside of Mumbai. I'm sorry to say, but yes, it is. And just a quick recap. Remember 6 E's. Minimal, that is effects. It's a minimal side effects: early recovery, early mobility, early oral intake, early discharge, and it is economical. I am very sure that all of you agree to this. None of you will be disagreeing to all these advantages that day surgery provides. And a anecdotal slide from Bombay Hospital days. This patient is nearly 100 years old. refused to get operated because he was worried about the anesthesia and that he would die on the operation table. We assured him that we will do it under pure local. We did it. We made him stand in the operation theater and tie his own pajamas. So now we need to think that from when should this patient be sent home? Now we need to ask, does this patient need to be admitted? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Naresh. I think it was a wonderful lecture. Radha, you wish to ask some questions?
I think he's covered each and everything. There is nothing left to ask. He has been explaining each and everything very.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, many in
Are
our
there any
experience also, we
questions?
see so many patients that we can send them home, but for the Mediclaim, I think they have to keep them for more than 24 hours. So I think that part also you answered pretty well.
Unfortunately, what happens is that most of us and our patients never bother to see the insurance policies. Just pick up your own insurance policy and go through it. You will find at least minimum 3 pages of a list of day surgery. It's a challenge. If you don't see it, let me know. I will
Okay.
see to it that they include it.
Great. Wonderful. I think it's all talking about from his own experience. I think that's what it counts, that you do so many cases and put it as an example. Wonderful, Dr. Naresh.
Maybe,
Great.
sir, in this COVID days, I think daycare surgery makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. You can, but unfortunately, it's not working that way.
Insurance people are also flexible about it nowadays because I had.
Now they have included OPD cases also. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
So
Yeah. So
Naresh is
can you
very
introduce the
passionate
next
about-
speaker, please? Yeah. Yeah, Niranjan.
Naresh is very passionate about day surgery, and he has taken this on a war footing to kind of educate the entire nation, not only the doctor, about the benefits of the day care surgery, and he went to the extent of forming this association along with Dr. Begani. Congratulations, Naresh.
Thank you, Niru. And he has been part of it right from the inception. So he knows our battle together. We have fought it together.
Great. Yeah, so I think we'll go to the next lecture now. Dr. Radha, can you just introduce the next speaker and next lecture, please?
We welcome Dr. Mukund. He will be talking on urinary catheterization. Actually, I've never met Dr. Mukund. So if you can introduce me to him, then it's good.
Yeah, Dr. Mukund Anandkar is a professor of surgery at BYNL Hospital, and also he's a honorary consultant at Bombay Hospital.
Okay.
And
He's
from
a
his vast
urologist.
experience,
He's a
he's a urologist. Yes, he's a urologist. So from his experience, I think there are a lot of things to learn. And this so-called simple procedure, which we always consider and come across every now and then, I think this will be the right thing to learn from him. So I think, Dr. Mukund, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Can you?
So please start, sir.
I'll start
Thank
share
you.
screen.
Yeah.
Where do I go? That's what I was trying. My share screen.
So this is one procedure every general surgeon must know. You see, I mean,
Absolutely. And it's
and
not
that
to be
too in a-
taken lightly. It's
Yeah.
not to be taken lightly. It cannot be performed by a nurse or a brother or something, especially the male catheterization.
Absolutely.
Can
Yes.
you
So
see
Dr. Mukund. Yeah. We can see your slides. Please start.
You can see, right? Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
1 second. This. I need to do a little. Okay. I hope my slides are visible and I am also visible. Right. At the outset, let me thank Mumbai Surgical Society, Dr. Niranjan Agrawal, Dr. Rajesh Yadav, my colleagues, for inviting me here on this platform today. As you rightly said, catheterization is a very simple procedure. And yes, it is done by doctors, nurses, and we teach it to patients themselves. But it has a lot of complications. It has its own serious consequences. And I'll re-emphasize that it has to be taught properly to our younger colleagues or even our residents, and they need to know the importance of this. And I have directed my presentation mostly for the residents. So if you get a little bored or you think it is too, what do you say, basic, so it be. Well, next 15 to 20 minutes, I am going to talk about discussing different types of catheterizations, modes of catheterizations, the tips for difficult catheterization if you're called to do one, and then common issues associated with catheters where you get repeated calls. Catheter in Greek means to let or send down, and it's been known since time immemorial. The first urinary catheter has been reported to have been passed by John Gaddison as early as 1300 to 1367. The design was adopted by C.R. Bard, who manufactured the first prototypes and named them in the honor of the surgeon. There are different indications of the catheterization. You can have a simple catheterization for diagnostic evaluation to obtain samples of urine. Therapeutic, when it is less than 6 weeks, we call it short-term catheterizations, and long-term catheterizations when there are uncorrectable outlet obstructions or neurogenic bladder with atonic detrusors. However, is there any contraindication to catheterization? Not really, no, not absolute, but yes, it should not be done just to determine the presence of infections. I have commonly seen catheterized sample lele just to see whether there is a really pyuria or no. No, it should not be done. To measure post-void residue, PVRs, catheter डाल के देख लो कितना urine बचता है. No, it can really lead to infections. It's not a routine order to monitor output in non-critical patients. In a self-voiding patient, please avoid doing it. Why are we concerned about catheterization so much? After all, it's a foreign body. It can cause trauma. It can lead to infections. And you'll be surprised that it's the fourth most painful procedure after nasogastric intubation, abscess drainage, and fracture reduction. Bacteriuria is just a matter of time. Within 4 days, the risk rises to as high as 30%. Around 15% to 25% of hospitalized patients are uncatheterized, and many of them unnecessary. And of these, urinary tract infection accounts around 23% of hospital-acquired infections, of which 80% are on a catheter. It can damage the urethra and lead to strictures. And once patient has a stricture, he can suffer lifelong. So let's see what are the different modes of catheterization and where we can safely divert the urine for a long periods of time. Coming to the first mode of catheterization is a condom catheterization. It is ideal for men who are able to void spontaneously, who have restricted mobility or even dementia. The advantage of being it's more comfortable, it's less painful and less restrictive. It has lower risk of urinary tract infections than indwelling catheters. But mind you, the skin breakdown over the penis or the pressure necrosis can occur. I have seen ghastly problems associated with this catheter, especially due to a thick strap which has been tightly applied there. So you must change this catheter at least once in 24 hours. Second is urethral catheterizations. There are two types, the routine ones which we do indwelling Foley catheterization. I'll talk about it in a little bit. The intermittent catheterizations, when you need in patients who need long-term catheterization, the self-intermittent catheterization can be done every 4 to 6 hourly. For example, patients of neurogenic bladder who have atonic detrusors, they are not able to pass urine on their own at all. So in such patients, rather than having an indwelling catheter, intermittent catheterization is advisable because it minimizes irritation and also minimizes the ascending infections. CIC, as it is called, is based on the principles that most infections are due to underlying structural or functional abnormalities rather than introduction of bacteria by a catheter. The patients are instructed to wash the catheter with soap and water and keep them in a dry container, in a clean dry container for reuse, and then you can keep changing these catheters every 24 to 48 hours. As you can see from the slide, continuous, as against continuous catheterization, intermittent catheterization has all sorts of benefits. Coming to the next mode of catheterization, that is suprapubic cystostomy. It can be used as an emergency, or it's preferred in people who cannot do self-catheterization but need a catheter for a long duration. Why? Because its insertion, maintenance, and change of the per-urethral catheter is really easy as against the per-urethral catheter, which is left indwelling for a long periods of time. And again, incidence of UTI is much lower as compared to per-urethral catheter. However, please beware of the injuries to the viscera, small bowels during insertion, and abdominal wall infections in the long term. In short, let's see the procedure. There are two types of suprapubic catheters available. One is a ready-made, pre-packed, sterile catheters, which are available from different companies, or a simple trocar and cannula through which you can use a routine Foley catheter, which can be passed and is readily available in all operation theaters. In fact, my residents carry one sterile this in their pockets. The SPC is typically done midway between umbilicus and a pubis in the local anesthesia after a skin incision. Aspirate that it is and make sure that you are draining clear urine and then insert and then inflate the balloon. However, a word of caution, please take ultrasound guidance. If there are multiple suprapubic scars, the abdominal wall is lax, or a patient is obese and you are not able to palpate the bladder, if it's a palpable bladder or a visible bladder, no problem. You don't need an ultrasound. But if the bladder is not visible, such as in such patients, it is difficult to see a bladder in such bellies. Then please, you go ahead do a suprapubic aspiration. If you are faced in an emergency and no help is available, simple suprapubic aspiration. 2 fingers above pubic symphysis can give you 12 to 24 hours. 24 hours when you need to shift the patient, you can simply insert a IV cannula and attach an extension tubing to it and shift this patient or wait till you get an expert help. Coming to per-urethral catheter, whenever you are being asked to do a catheterization, think a little bit. Why do I need a catheter? How long it is going to be inserted? What size of catheter is really necessary? Is silicone catheter really necessary to be inserted in the patient, or I can get away with a simple latex catheter? Let's answer these questions one by one. Coming to catheter material, they can vary from red rubber latex to PVC, and as the stiffness increases. A simple plain red rubber catheter is available in the operation theaters, but it is not meant for per-urethral use and is usually provided in non-sterile packets, so better avoid it. And they are not really stiff enough to be passed per-urethrally without any problems. PVC or polyvinyl chloride catheters are stiffer catheters. They have clear material and which can allow you to see the urine output, the fluid which is being drained. They're typically used in clean intermittent self-catheterization. They are used for a short term, usually single use and throw. Coming to natural latex rubber catheters, they are flexible and inexpensive, but are more prone to infections, and some patients can have hypersensitivity to latex. They're supposed to be kept maximum for 2 weeks. All silicone or silastic catheters cause lesser inflammation to the urethra. They cause lesser irritation to the urethra, and hence there is lesser incidence of urethritis, and hence they are supposed to cause less strictures, and they can be kept up to 12 weeks. Silicone catheters have wider lumen. So whenever you are expecting a purulent urine, you can choose a silicone catheter. And they are stiffer than the latex catheters. So you can use this catheter if you expect a stricture, because they can negotiate the strictures better. Then these are the catheters which are routinely used, are available in all operation theaters nowadays. They are elastomer or silicolatex catheters. That is the latex catheter, they are coated inside out with silicone. They're as good as silicone catheters. They combine the strength and flexibility of latex with durability and reduced incrustation of the silicone catheters. Then we also have coated catheters available in the market. They're coated with silver or even antimicrobial like nitrofurantoin, and they have been designed to diminish bacteriuria, but they have no long-term benefits really, because a lot of studies have proved that they are of no use to prevent urinary tract infections if used for more than a week. To compare different catheters as shown in this slide, PVC catheters, it's a short-term, large internal diameter, but it's usually done for CICs. Silicone catheters can be kept up to 12 weeks, and simple other catheters can be kept for lesser than 15 days. I'm often asked question, how long you can keep a silicone catheter, Mukund? Just wanted to emphasize on that point a little bit. Silicone or silico-latex catheters can be kept up to 12 weeks, no doubt, because they cause less urethral inflammation. They also cause less encrustations. Therefore, they are advantageous for long-term use. However, they do not prevent biofilm formations. Over a period of time, the film forms over the catheter, and these catheters really don't prevent that. So chances of urinary tract infections are same. So my advice would be, even if you use a silicone catheter, change it every 2 to 3 weeks if a patient needs a catheter for a long duration of time. Then the next question is, how do you choose the size of the catheter? Which catheter size should I use for a particular patient? A 12 to 14 French catheter is sufficient to clear urine. Liters of urine it can drain over a period of time in the daytime. Don't worry about the size. 14 to 16 French if you are expecting a little turbid urine containing debris. So this is what is more than enough for your routine use. 18, 20, 22, 24 are usually for hematuria clots, and we use it for the patients of post-URP or patients who have hematurias and are actively bleeding. There are two lengths available, 41 to 45 and 20 to 25. If you can find a 25 centimeter catheter, use it in women, because it's much, the catheter which comes out of the urinary meatus, there is a shorter length and hence lesser chances of infection. There are designs of catheter tips in different types with eyes staggered or opposite each other, etc. They have been designed to reduce the post-void or the residual urine in the bladder. But the commonly one used is a Nilton type, which has two drainage eyes against each other. And the other one, which is commonly used, is a Tiemann type or a curved tip, which helps in negotiating the bladder neck or a high bladder neck or a curvature of the urethra or a prostate. Then you have one-way catheter or a two-way catheter or a three-way catheter. The three-way catheter typically has a third channel to facilitate continuous bladder irrigations. Coming to accessories, one accessory which I wanted to talk about was a urine collection bag. Please choose a bag with a kink-resistant tubes. We have plenty of urine bags available in the market, and some of them are really of bad quality. If you want to measure the urine output, then there are measuring jars over it where you can measure up to 200 or 150 cc's per hour and then empty this into the bag, and you can measure hourly urine output. But remember, empty the bag as frequently as possible, because especially if it is 2/3 full. Don't wait till it becomes completely full. Change these bags every 5 to 7 days. There are something called leg urine bags which are available in the market freely. They can be tied to the leg, and the drainage tube can be tied to the thigh, and patient can easily wear a pajama over it or a loose clothing over it, rather than seeing the patient moving around in the or sending the patient home with a catheter and they carry it in their hand, and which is not really a good sign. So these bags are very useful if you want to send the patient home on a catheter. Coming to catheter insertion procedures, please talk to the patient. I've seen a lot of residents just go and ask the patient to lie down and just start passing the catheter. But you have to talk to the patient and explain to him what you're going to do. Take the history, ask if he has undergone any procedure in the past. Please ensure that he is on an antibiotic cover. Mind you, one episode of catheterization can lead to bacteremia. Ensure before you start the catheterization that you have plenty of jellies available. A very common sight, you go to any ward and want to catheterize, they will give you a half emptied jelly packet, which is really irritating. You have to have 2 single-use packets. Do not use these packets again. Do not use these jelly tubes again. Make sure that you have different size and types of catheters available to you just in case you need them, and a Terumo glide wire if you're expecting a difficult catheterization. Please do a surgical preparation as if you're going ahead with a surgery. Don't take it so lightly. You need to have a sterile with full aseptic precautions. Insert the one full packet of jelly or into the urethra and wait. Wait for 30 seconds to a minute. Let that jelly act. Don't be in a hurry to insert a catheter. It's really a painful procedure for a patient. Open it in a sterile technique, hold the penis at a 90-degree angle and then advance the catheter till you hit the sphincter. Pause there, ask the patient to relax, talk to him, and then just continue to advance it using a gentle pressure. Never, never, never force the catheter. When should you fill the balloon? Please ensure that you've passed a catheter till the Y junction, especially in males, and there is a free flow of urine. If you cannot have a free flow, if you are not having a free flow of urine, don't instill the balloon. Make sure that your tip has entered the bladder by irrigating, aspirating, and if you're not sure about it, don't inflate. You can find out, change the catheter or do other procedures, do other maneuvers. Anchor the catheter tubing to the lateral part of the abdominal wall with a tape in males and always retract the prepuce. Don't forget about it because you will see paraphymosis developing very quickly. In a female, angle the catheter upwards. Again, do not force the catheter up. And if you happen to put it in the vagina but for some reason, don't use the same catheter and pass it into the urethra. Use another catheter because you are introducing vaginal infection into the urinary tract, which is sterile. Secure this catheter to the inner aspect of the female patient's thigh. Fix all urinary catheter. Please, again, I will repeat, fix all urinary catheters. We see so many patients having accidental dislodgements, excessive traction leading to hematuриas because of unintentional motions. Then how much fluid should be instilled in the balloon? Smallest to retain the catheter in the bladder. That's it. You really don't need too much. 10 ml balloon is more than enough with a 14 French catheter. If you inflate large amount of balloon, it can leave behind large residual urines, can also cause bladder spasms and then leakage and residues. And if you inflate it less, if underinflated, it can kink the tips and actually block the catheter and not drain enough. So 14 French Foley catheter and 10 ml balloon is ideal for routine adult cases. Now, if you come across for a difficult catheterization or you are called for it, just to give you little statistics, my department sees around 15 calls every month for difficult catheterization, which is not a big number, but 5 out of 15, they walk in easily enough with enough lubrication. You instill 20 cc saline and they just walk in. Rest of the 2 will need a stiffer silicone catheter. The 2 patients will need SPC and around 6 patients will need manipulations over wire, per rectal catheters, etc. And we also see, unfortunately, around 3 to 4 calls per month, which because of accidental inflation of balloon in the urethra is causing hematuриas. You assess this patient, take the history of surgery, whether he has had previous LUTs, whether has stricture, BPH, prostate surgeries, whether this patient is on antiplatelets, because they can otherwise bleed too much. Find out where is the catheter where is the difficult part. Is it at the meatus? Is it at the submeatal? That is within 2 to 2.5 centimeters, or within 15 to 20 centimeters, which is in the penile urethra or bulbar urethra, or beyond that when it is almost at the bladder neck or prostate, because depending on this, you can do manipulations. These are the common causes like strictures, false passages because of previous attempts, bladder neck contractions, etc. So what to do when you are faced with a particular problem? Let's see one by one. Meatal stenosis, another simple things to get over. It's a pinpoint meatus, just do a good generous cut. Cut open the meatus ventrally. Ventral meatotomy is more than enough. Then pass a catheter. Don't worry about this bleeding. No need to do suturing, etc. Just put a catheter and apply pressure for 2 minutes. It will stop. If the patient has a urethral stricture or a false passage, what you can do with one of the methods is insert a hydrophilic 0.035 glide wire into the urethra till the time it gains access to the bladder. Pass it enough, long length of bladder to pass a sufficient length to be sure that it's in the bladder. If it comes out of the meatus, if the guide wire comes out of the meatus, it is in the false passage or strictures. It will hit something inside and come out. So pass it enough so that it just goes in and doesn't come out. Then when you're sure, backthread the Foley catheter into the Foley catheter using a using a IV cannula or a needle, and then by using a cylinder technique, just insert the Foley catheter over a guide wire and let it go in. If you are come across a patient who has urinary retention due to, say, patient like urethral calculus like this, what you can do is a forceful installation of 50 cc saline as catheter is advanced will displace such thing and your catheter will go in. If you are at the bladder neck, one of the ways to do advance the catheter is apply perineal pressure, because the perineal pressure will reduce this angle between the bulbar urethra and prostatic urethra and guide it upwards. And or a per-rectal examination, a third hand, take help of somebody, your colleague, and rock this angle so that you can direct this catheter into the bladder neck, which is sometimes narrow. If you come across a false passages like this, one of the ways to overcome this is a filiform bogey. There are multiple small bogies available. Pass a bogey till it meets a resistance, which has probably entered a false passage. Let that remain there. Pass, then take another filiform bogey and pass it by the side of the catheter. Repeat this procedure. At some point, you will be able to successfully pass filiform bogey in with a little resistance in the bladder. Just leave this inside, remove the rest, and thread a catheter over it. I've just put this slide to tell you that please avoid this catheter guide. I've seen multiple patients having multiple times that surgeon creating a false passage. This is not a good way to catheterize in any unless you are really an expert or using it intraoperatively just after TURP, etc. But in a difficult catheterization, please avoid catheter guides. There are multiple adverse effects, complications of catheterizations, but let's just discuss in 2 minutes what are the common issues when you are asked to ask for unique call, say, catheter removal. Catheter removal is again not to be taken very lightly. Please see, I have seen patients developing fever, bacteremias after catheter removal. Make sure that they are receiving antibiotics when you remove the catheter. Make sure that they have emptied their bowels. This is especially post-operative patients. I've seen many patients going having a retention post after removal of the catheters because they were constipated, because they were not adequately mobilized out of the bed. Make sure they are done. If you are expecting BPH, make sure that they have started their alpha blockers again, or if they're not, just give them alpha blockers for 2 days before removal of the catheter and then remove the catheter. If you come across a call when there is no urine in the back, check for the kings. See whether the patient has anuria. If not, do an ultrasound to make sure that bladder is full or bladder balloon is inside. Otherwise, you can change the catheter. Pericatheter leak, another very irritating problem. Check for the blocks. Just see to it that the patient change the urine bag. See to it that it is draining urine continuously unhindered. And one thing you can do is change to a smaller catheter. Yes, change to a smaller catheter, not a bigger one with a smaller balloon, because bigger catheter, bigger balloon leads to bladder spasms and hence patient can have pericatheter leak. We attend so many calls wherein catheter has been pulled out. What you do, check for bleeding. Whether there is active bleeding, don't do anything. Check whether there is a hematoma in the perineal region. Again, don't do anything. If one of these two is present, just give a tight perineal compression and wait. Then you can make one skill attempt at reinsertion, especially either using your glide wire or a smaller size catheter. If it doesn't go, stop, don't do anything. You will increase the trauma further. Then you are faced with two options, either to do a cystoscopy or put a suprapubic catheter. Bladder training or a Foley clamping. I've seen so many patients, so many post-operative patients. The housemen or the nurses have been instructed to clamp the Foley catheter before removal. It has no role. Please don't do it. There is no role of clamping a Foley at all before removal. If you want to give a catheter-free trial, just remove it and observe whether the patient is passing urine, whether he's in retention, acute retention, or a chronic retention. The balloon doesn't deflate, there's no need to panic. You can just cut the valve, because sometimes the valve is the problem. If the valve is a problem, as soon as you cut the valve, your catheter will come out because the balloon gets deflated. You can pass a small steelette into that into that opening, or a simple USG guided needle puncture is that which suffices. I get a lot of calls saying that there's mineral deposits and sometimes it continues to block the catheter. Mind you, this condition occurs because of alkaline urine, which leads to mineral precipitations, wherein infection supersedes, and it causes precipitation of crystals, wherein mucus, protein, and blood clots gets deposited and forms a nidus. How do you treat this? Increase the fluid intake, number one. Acidify the urine. Don't alkalinize the urine in such patients. You will worsen the situation. Acidify the urine by giving vitamin C, 500 BD. Treat their infections. This, and if it still continues, you can use a larger bore catheters in such situations, but nothing works better than replacing the catheters periodically. Bladder spasms, we have discussed, it occurs usually because of large catheters and overinflated balloons. And if you have such a patient, you have to add bladder relaxants. The Flavoxate is a very good drug without any anticholinergic side effects. So try that first. If it doesn't work, then we have tolterodine or sulfasalazine, which relaxes the bladder enough to avoid bladder spasms. Catheter-associated urinary tract infections is a very significant concern, and you can go on talking about it for an hour. Even the very best catheter care, most will have infected urine after 10 to 14 days. And there are three sources of infections. Catheter meatal junction, where it goes inside because of capillary action or during insertions, catheter bag connections, and drainage bag outlet devices. So one of the reason why it gets infected is the bag is held over the bladder area in the sense, and the tube drops lower than the bag. What happens is if you hold the bag above the level of the bladder, the urine in the bladder goes retrogradely inside the bladder, leading to infection. So this is one of the very important reasons for CAUTI. Then what it does is the biofilm, it forms biofilms, and it is really a big villain in CAUTI because bacteria, when they adhere and multiply on catheter surfaces, biofilms are formed, and these films do not allow antibiotics to reach the organisms. And all catheter materials are subject to biofilm. So changing the catheter frequently is the only solution if you have to keep it for a long period of time. But having said that, asymptomatic bacteriuria is another reason why which does not need treatment, exceptions being pregnancy, impending surgeries, and renal transplants. To conclude, insert catheters only when necessary, keep only as long as necessary. Use condom catheters, suprapubic catheters, or clean intermittent catheters as alternatives as and when possible. Using aseptic techniques and sterile equipment has a lot of importance. Use a single-use packet of lubricant jelly, please. Don't reuse those jellies. Use the smallest caliber catheter, 14 French 10 cc balloon, more than enough. Please fix all urinary catheters to prevent accidental dislodgements. Maintain sterile closed drainage system. The catheter and drainage tube should not be disconnected unless for irrigation. If you need to collect the specimen, pass a sterile needle and aspirate. Do not disconnect. To maintain the unobstructed urinary flow, use kink-resistant tubings, urine bags. Use leg bags if you want to send the patient home. And collecting bags should always be kept below the level of the bladder. Keep this meatus clean. There is no role of the betadine or any cream at the meatus. No, not really necessary. They can simply clean the catheter, which is seen with a soap and water, and keep that area clean. That's enough. No role of bacteriological monitoring every now and then because we don't treat asymptomatic bacteriurias. Please retract that prepuce after catheterization and avoid antibiotic prophylaxis. To conclude, catheterization, yes, is a routinely performed procedure simple by doctors and nurses, but it has potential serious complications, and sterile catheterization techniques and catheter care, I sincerely believe, should be taught during residency because the behavior picked up during training is important and it is very difficult to change later. And as they say, given the choice between changing human behavior or designing a better device, the device will always be more successful rather than changing anybody's behavior. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll welcome them.
Excellent lecture, Dr. Mukund. I think you covered most of the, important points in catheterization, pre, post, and otherwise the complications as well. There are a lot of things, new things about the new types of catheters, I think, which you are in fact learning for me as well. Yeah, Dr. Radha, you were asking some question or something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Dr. Mukund. There are times when a smaller number catheter didn't go, and I have used a bigger number because it is stiffer and it has gone through. So, anything about that, sir?
Yeah, as I said, 14 French catheters suffices in most of the patients. If you expect the urethra to be narrow or a patient has had a stricture, what you need is a stiffer catheter. So
Yeah,
12
right.
French silicone catheter is another. So you should have at least 12 French and 14 French. 12 French silicone catheter and a 14 French simple latex Foley catheters in your armamentarium. And these two will take care of 98-97% of the cases.
Mukund, one question from me. Many a
Yep.
time, as you say, that the softer latex catheters do not go, but the stiffer one goes with some force, like the K90, 91, etc. But they are not self-retaining. So
Correct.
if you need the catheter to be for a longer time, how do you fix this catheter? Because most of the time they keep on, you have put it with great difficulty and you don't want it to come out, but you are not able to fix them and make them self-retaining. So any trick to
Yes, they can see you need if you are able to pass say infant feeding tube 8 French or something. What you can do is you have to change this into a catheter, self-retaining Foley catheter by passing a J-tip glide wire which goes inside and comes out of the hole into the bladder. Then remove this catheter and backtrade a Foley catheter 8, 10, 12 French on a into the bladder, which is the simplest on the which is the recommended procedure. But if you have to fix these catheters, there is no definite way. You just whatever we have been doing to fix it to the penis is is one of the best ways. But what you can do is take a simple stitch, a small stitch at the meatus, and then fix as if you're fixing a drain.
Yes, yes.
Don't worry about meatus in the sense just lateral to the meatus. Take a small stitch, say with 4 or 5 material, and fix it. It will stay there. Your idea is to keep that catheter for 24 hours to 48 hours maximum. So you can do that. I've tried to cover it mostly for the residents. Hope we have some.
What is the role of ether? I mean, in our residency time, we used to use that ether if the balloon never got deflated.
I didn't talk about it in detail because I was going towards my time. Please avoid ether. No,
Yeah, now
no over. I have seen. Right. I have seen patients patients having chemical cystitis, severe chemical cystitis, which led to even a small capacity bladder just because somebody used ether to burst the balloon. I've seen overinflation of balloons because by using different, say simple saline or anything, what happens is that balloon bursts inside, but it leaves behind small balloon rubber parts inside the bladder. They don't come out, especially in the male patient. And later on, that forms as a nidus to form stone. So no overinflation. Best thing is if you have a problem, it's never an emergency. You can have an ultrasound guided simple needle puncture. In a female patient, per vaginally, you can also pass some very thin needle. It can be done if you don't have an ultrasound guidance, but you can easily wait and just puncture the balloon by some method.
One question by Dr. Sham has asked about how to give the perineal pressure in case of traumatic injuries to the, when the catheter is comes out.
You form a small ball of a cotton or the gauze pieces or whatever you can ball like, press it, keep it on the perineum and apply the crepe bandage and give a good hard pressure in that area if there is bleeding. The perineal pressure, the commonest area where the balloon has been inflated and leads to bleeding is the bulbar urethra or a bulbomembranous juncture. So this compression will easily take care of it. Nobody really inflates the balloon in the penile urethra. Penile urethra can be easily compressed with your hand, no problems. It is the bulbar urethra which usually undergoes a problem, which causes a problem or leads to bleeding. So a perineal pressure with a cotton ball, which has been pressed with a simple speaking or.
Good. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think Dr.
Thank
Mukund,
you
you
very
answered
much.
most of the questions, and it was a very complete lecture as per the
Very
catheterization
beautiful
has
talk.
gone.
Yeah, thank you, Mukund. Was a wonderful talk. Great.
Thanks,
Great to
Rajesh.
see.
Thanks, Niranjan. Thank you. Thank you.
So can we invite the next speaker?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Chandrakant Sable. He is an assistant professor
And Grand
in,
Medical.
yes, your college. Radha, please introduce.
Dr. Sable, we welcome you. Your topic here, he's a lecturer in Grand Medical College. He's super junior, I think decades junior. So we welcome you to our platform. You'll be speaking on incision and drainage.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Incision,
Dr. Sable is
incision and
working with
positions.
me
He's an
as a-
assistant
Yes,
professor,
sir.
government Grand Medical College. Yeah, Dr. Sable, can you start
Dr.
sharing?
Sable is
I will
assistant
share my
professor,
screen.
Grand Medical College. He's in my unit.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Great. Yeah, can we start then, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Today we are going to discuss incisions and positions in general surgery. Good incisions and surgical positions are crucial part in any surgery. The surgical incisions is a cut made through the skin to facilitate operations or procedures. It should be the aim of the surgeon to employ type of incision considered to be most suitable for that operation to be performed. In doing any surgical incisions, the important things are the accessibility, extensibility, and security. While principles of surgical incisions should be long enough for good exposure. The slitting incisions are better than cutting incisions. Avoid cutting incisions and nerves. Choose correct positions. Retract muscles and abdominal organs towards the neuromuscular bundle. Insert drains through the separate incisions. Close the wound layer by layer. While choosing the choice of incisions and ideal incision depends on the type of surgery, whether it is elective or emergency surgery, the target organ of surgery, previous surgery or scars of the patient, grade of patient obesity, and surgeon's own experience and preferences are care taken. The Langer's lines corresponds to the natural orientation of collagen fibers in dermis and are generally parallel to the orientation of underlying muscle fibers. Incision made parallel to Langer lines are heal better and produce less scarring than those cut across. Now we are going to discuss the common abdominal and pelvic incisions. It includes vertical incisions, transverse oblique incisions. So in vertical incisions, the midline incisions include upper midline, lower midline incisions, and single vertical midline incisions. So paramedian incisions are generally 2 to 5 centimeter lateral, parallel to the midline. In transverse incisions include transverse muscle dividing incisions, fenestal incisions, Maillard incisions. Oblique incisions include Cocker's subcostal incision, McBurney's incisions, oblique muscle cutting incisions, inguinal incisions, abdominal thoracic incisions, and retroperitoneal and extraperitoneal approach incisions. In vertical midline incisions, which follows the linea alba, it may be in a upper midline, lower midline, or a single incision. The midline incisions are favored in a diagnostic laparotomy as it allows for maximum access in abdominal cavity. Upper midline incisions are extend from the xiphoid to above umbilicus. Division of peritoneum is best performed at the lower end of incision, just above umbilicus, so that the falciform ligament can be seen and avoided. The upper midline incisions are useful for stomach, duodenum, and biliary tract surgeries and pancreatic surgeries. While the lower midline incisions are from umbilicus superiorly to the pubic symphysis inferiorly, allow access to the pelvic organs. The peritoneum should be open in uppermost area to avoid injury to bladder. The lower midline incisions are most useful for pelvic surgeries.
while comparing, the midline incisions are generally preferred in surgeries because they are almost bloodless, avoids any muscle cutting and nerves. They are easy to open and easy to close. It's having a disadvantage that the lower midline incisions sometimes have adhesions. Now let's come to the Cocker's subcostal incision. It affords excellent exposure to gallbladder, biliary tract, and it can be made on left side to have a better access to the spleens. It is started in midline 2 to 5 cm below the xiphoid and extends downwards, outwards, and parallel to and about 2.5 cm below the costal margins. It is especially used in cholecystectomy and any biliary tract surgeries and any hepatic surgeries. There are two modifications of the Cocker's incision. One is a chevron incision and Mercedes-Benz incision. A chevron incision is nothing but the bilateral subcostal incision that meets in midline. Chevron incision is most commonly used in pancreatic surgeries, Whipple surgeries, any hepatic resections, or any stomach tumors. When the chevron incision is extended in midline vertically, it is used in liver transplant surgery. Now let's come to the transverse muscle dividing incision. In newborn and infant, this incision is preferred because more abdominal exposure is gained per length of incision than vertical exposure. Because infant's abdomen is longer transversely than vertically. It is also true for short obese adults. The transverse incisions include other transverse incisions includes fenestal incisions, Cherenis incision, Maillard incision, and Kussner incision. The fenestal incisions are generally 12 to 20 centimeter and 3 to 5 centimeter above the pubic symphysis. That along the transverse incisions taken 3 to 5 centimeter above the pubic symphysis, it heals cosmetically better, and it is preferred by gynecologists and urologists. And the low fenestyle incisions are Cherenis and Kussner incisions. The basic difference in these incisions is that all these transverse incisions, skin is cut transverse level, while in Kussner incision, the fascia is cut at vertical level. And in fenestal incision and Kussner incision, the peritoneum is open at vertical level. In fenestal incision, we just retract the rectus abdominis muscles, while in Cherenis and Maillard incisions, we cut the rectus abdominis muscle. Now let's come to the open appendectomy incisions. And the incisions are taken through the McBurney's point, which is at the level of umbilicus to the anterosuprailiac spine, lateral 1/3 and medial 2/3. That is McBurney's point. And the classical McBurney's incision is a slight oblique incision through the McBurney's point. And the modified McBurney's incision is through along the Langer's line. It is also called as a Langer's incision. And when the incision is through McBurney's point at a transverse level, it is called as a Rocky-Davis incision. When the Rocky-Davis incision is extended medially, it's called as Fowler-West extension. And when Rocky-Davis extension, Rocky-Davis extended is laterally, it is called as Rutherford-Morrison incision. The McBurney's incision is a muscle splitting incision, while the Rocky-Davis is a muscle cutting incision. Rocky-Davis incision feels better, but there is a chances of injury to nerves. Now come to the inguinal incisions. The inguinal incisions may be taken as per surgeon's preference along the inguinal crease or a transverse level. These incisions are used for inguinal hernia, testicular cancers, varicocele, undescended testis, and orchidectomy. Incisions for radical inguinal lymphadenectomy includes the single incision approach or double incision approach. Single incision approach includes oblique incision along the inguinal crease, S-shaped incisions, vertical incisions. Double incisions include the lower midline and inguinal incisions. For unilateral pelvic lymphadenectomy, oblique abdominal incision combined with inguinal incision. Depending on the lymph node involved, we can choose the incision. The lazy S-shaped incisions are better because the chances of flap necrosis is less in a lazy S-shaped incisions. The common neck dissection incisions include modified Kreil's incision, Martin incision, McPhee incision, and Shatner incision. The modified Kreil's incision is Y-shaped, and the double Martin Y-shaped is incision. One is a submandibular and one is a supraclavicular incision that connected vertically. it gives better exposure, but there are chances of flap necrosis as there is a tri-radiate incision. The maxi incisions, there are chances of less flap necrosis, but it gives less exposure. Now let's come to the thyroidectomy incision. Patient is positioned in a head high position around 10 to 15 degree high level to avoid air embolism. First, we mark the thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, and the suprasternal notch. Then the incision is marked 2 centimeter above the suprasternal notch or 2 finger widths above the suprasternal notch. Now come to the incisions of modified radical mastectomy. The first diagram we are seeing the classical Stewart incision. It is an elliptical skin incision for central and subareolar breast cancer. The modified Stewart oblique incisions are elliptical skin incisions for inner quadrant of the breast cancer. Now the classical or oblique incisions for carcinoma of upper outer quadrant are used. When the lower and inner and vertical mass is there, the variation of or incision in the second diagram is used. More vertical incisions are preferred. Now let's come to the thoracic incisions. Thoracic incisions for trauma include the median sternotomy, book thoracotomy, posterolateral thoracotomy, and anterolateral thoracotomy, and extension of an anterolateral thoracotomy across the sternum. The incisions preferred when the stabs, anteroprecordial stab wounds are there, we prefer the median sternotomy wounds. In case of any posterior lung injury or injury to intercostal vessels, consider posterolateral thoracotomy. If on the side of injury, right or left, the anterolateral thoracotomy is preferred. Thoracoabdominal incisions. These incisions converts pleural cavity and peritoneal cavity into one common cavity. The right-sided incisions are used for hepatic resections, while the left-sided incisions are for lower esophagus and the proximal stomach. The incisions for retroperitoneal approach. Incision begins at the level of umbilicus at the margin of rectus sheath and extended into the flank towards the 12th rib for 12 to 20 centimeters. Patient position in supine position with left side elevated up to the 30 to 45 degrees and with left knee and thigh flex. The types of incisions used in nephrectomy are full flank incision, anterior thoracoabdominal incision, subcostal chevron incision, and midline incision. The incision preferred depends on the upper pole tumors, lower pole tumors, or mid pole tumors. Generally, in upper pole tumors, we can choose the anterior thoracoabdominal incisions or chevron incision when the both bilateral kidneys to be handled, or we have to search for the metastatic deposits. The most common incision is flank incision. The patient is positioned in a lateral position, lateral kidney bridge position, and the incision is lined up between the 11th and 12th ribs, going from the mid-axillary line to the edge of the rectus and aimed at a position 1 centimeter, 1 to 2 centimeter above the umbilicus. The incision continues through the lumbosacral fascia. Then finally, the peritoneum is incised and the diaphragm is cut about 5 to 10 centimeters. Now let's come to the surgical positions topic. The patient positioning depends on 2 factors: the site of operation and the organ to be operated. The other important factor is surgeon's choice and decisions. The most common positions are the supine position, prone position, lateral position, left lateral position, Trendelenburg position, reverse Trendelenburg position, Fowler, semi-Fowler position, kidney position, lithotomy position, Sims position, and jackknife position. One must be aware of the important anatomical and physiological changes associated with anesthesia, patient positioning, and the procedure. The criteria should be met to prevent injury from pressure, obstruction, and stretching. There is no interference with respiration, no interference with circulation, no pressure on peripheral nerves, minimal skin pressures, accessibility to the operative site, accessibility for anesthetics, no undue musculoskeletal discomfort, maintenance of individual requirements. The supine position is most commonly used for surgeries. The patient has to be placed on back with legs extended and uncrossed at the ankle. Arms either on arm boards abducted to less than 90 degrees with palms up or tucked. The spinal column should be in alignment with legs parallel to the bed. Head in line with the spine and face upwards. Hips are parallel to the spine. Padding is placed under the head, arms, and heels with a pillow placed under the knees. Safety belts are placed 2 inches above the knees while not impeding the circulation. The supine position's greatest concerns are the circulation and pressure points. We have to also take care about the nerve damage. The most commonly nerve damage is the brachial plexus when the position of the arm is more than 90 degrees. Radial ulnar nerves when the compression against the bed, metal attachments, or the any team members lean forward against the arms during the procedure. The peroneal and tibial injuries for crossing the feet or the plantar flexion at the ankle. The vulnerable bony prominences include due to pressure are include occiput, spine, scapula, olecranon process, and sacrum and calcaneum. The another variations in a supine position include lawn chair position. In this position, the back of the bed is raised, legs below the knees are lowered to an equivalent angle. Slight Trendelenburg tilt. It is having advantage that it is better tolerated by awake patients or under monitor anesthesia care. Venous drainage from the lower extremities is enhanced. Zippoid to pubic distance reduced and easy closure in laparotomy incisions. The Trendelenburg position. The patient is placed in supine position while the bed is modified to head down tilt around 35 to 45 degrees, resulting in head being lower than the pelvis. Arms are in a comfortable position either at the side or on the bilateral arm board. The Trendelenburg position is mostly used in inguinal hernia surgeries or pelvic surgery. So it has having advantage that to increase venous return after spinal anesthesia, to increase the central venous volume to facilitate central circulation, to minimize aspiration during the regurgitation. The reverse Trendelenburg position is opposite of Trendelenburg position. The entire bed is tilted so that the head is higher than the feet. It is used for some head and neck surgeries and some laparoscopic procedures like laparoscopic cholecystectomy and fundoplication or any hepatic surgery and biliary tract surgeries. It facilitates exposure and aids in breathing. Decrease blood supply to the area. A padded footboard is used to prevent the patient from slip towards the feet. Reduce venous return, therefore hypotension. Prone position. Access to the posterior fossa of the skull and posterior spine and buttocks and perirectal area and the lower extremities it is used. Lateral position. The patient should be anesthetized before the lateral position in supine position, then shifted to the lateral position. Shoulder and hips turned simultaneously to prevent torsion of the spine and great vessels. Lower leg is flexed at the hip and upper leg is straight. Head must be in cervical alignment with the spine. Axillary roll place caudal to axilla of the downside arm. Padding placed under the lower leg to ankle and foot and upper leg and to lower arm and upper arm. Pillows placed lengthwise between the legs and between the arms. The lateral position with kidney bridge. It is mostly used in an nephrectomy. And flexed lateral decubitus position. Point of flexion should lie under the iliac crest rather than the flank or the lower ribs to optimize ventilation of the dependent lung. Lithotomy position. With the patient in the supine position, the hips are flexed in 80 to 100 degrees from the torso so that the legs are parallel to it and the legs are abducted to the 30 to 45 degrees to expose the perineal region. The patient's buttocks are even with the lower break in the bed. The legs are raised, position, and lower slowly simultaneously with the permission of the anesthetic. Adequate padding and support for the legs and feet should be eliminate the pressure on joints and nerve plexus. The position must be symmetrical. The perineum should be in line with the logical axis of the bed. The variations of lithotomy include low lithotomy, standard lithotomy, and high lithotomy. The low lithotomy position is generally used for any vaginal examination and perineal examination. The standard lithotomy position is generally used for surgeries like fissure, hemorrhagectomy, or fistula in anosurgery. These are different kind of stirrups used for lithotomy positions: the candy cane stirrups, knee crest stirrups, and boot support stirrups. the jackknife position. The patient is prone position and is tilted in midline, used for anal surgeries like piloidal sinus. The knee chest position is further exaggeration of the jackknife position, used for generally sigmoidoscopy. These are some common positions in general surgery. Thank you.
Very exhaustively explained.
Right.
I have a question.
Yes,
Dr. Saple,
yes ma'am.
you didn't include parotid incision in this, or it was only abdominal?
Yes ma'am, I not.
That's a very important part too, right?
Yes, sir.
Anyway, very well explained, very exhaustive. Which is a preferred incision? Is it a midline or a para-midline incision? And
A
why?
midline incision is preferred because it is almost bloodless, easy to open and easy to close. It does not include any muscles and nerves than
What is the
paramedian incision.
chances of burst abdomen in midline or para-midline? Paramedian.
A paramedian, there is less chances of burst because we close it layer by layer, paramedian incision.
Very nicely explained, very exhaustive. Sir, Kamath sir.
Yeah, two questions I think are in the question chat box, which is one is about the incisions for femoral hernia,
Yes.
and the second one is between the positions,
Lloyd
different
Davis.
Where is the question?
Chandrakant,
In
you can
inguinal hernia,
question answer session below, and you can answer the questions there.
yes. For femoral hernia, we can use inguinal incision, or we can extend that infraredly, or we can use a vertical incision also in a femoral hernia.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent lecture overall. I think it was a very vast and a difficult.
Very exhaustive. Yeah. You explained it very well. This was. There are no more questions, sir. I can't see any questions.
And what is more important is that the anatomical knowledge has to be sound before you plan your incision. I think that is a basic thing that one must understand in the whole scenario. Is that if you have a sound anatomical knowledge about the nerves and the vessels which are going, the neurovascular bundles, the way they travel, then the taking incision becomes much easier and better. I think overall excellently taken lecture. You covered all aspects about the incision. Good show. Thank you.
Dr. Rajiv wants
Thank
to know what is the difference between lithotomy and Lloyd Davis position.
Yes.
There's one question there, difference between lithotomy and Lloyd Davis position.
Dr. Saple. Very
Yes, yes, yes. I think Lloyd Davis position is the exaggerated lithotomy position.
It should be the other way. Now, lithotomy is an exaggerated version of the Lloyd Davis.
Yes.
Because lithotomy is more flexion at the hip.
Yes, sir.
So Lloyd Davis has more of an obtuse angle at the hip compared to a lithotomy.
Who is this?
Lord Davis position is also called as the Trendelenburg position, which is lithotomy with a head down position.
Even the way the legs are in the stirrup, Naresh,
Legs apart.
is a little
Yes.
different, you know.
Yes.
They are not, a lithotomy is classically when you're doing any perianal surgery, because the angle at the hip will be more acute and the knees will be bent. But the Lloyd Davis position, when you're doing for a along, say, a laparoscopic AR or something, there is a more gentle, you don't need the hips so much acutely angulated, because that comes in the way of your surgery.
And it's
So-
a head low position. So
Yeah.
it's the patient is not straight supine. It's
Yeah.
the patient is head down.
Head down, and the legs are not more flexed. They are
More
more.
flexed, yeah. So
know,
there is a more obtuse angle. It's not a right
Obtuse.
angle at the hip.
It
You
gives
get
you
a
the
more obtuse angle, yeah.
more space for operating
Yeah,
as well.
more space for operating. Yeah.
Mainly, the lithotomy is for the perineal, when the surgeon is almost all
Correct.
procedures are done entirely in the perineal region.
Yeah.
And when abdomen and perineal both are to be combined, such as maybe something like a APR or LAR or something like that, then I think this position is very useful.
Yeah. So what we do is, when we are doing the laparoscopic part, is the Lloyd Davis, and then we pull the stirrups up to make it into a classical lithotomy when you go to the perineal region.
That's right. When you go to the
When you're doing
perineal
the
section.
AR to an
Absolutely.
APR.
Right. For that, you require that adjustable, the leg position. The stirrups
Should
are
I-
adjustable.
Should I
ones
read
what you
out
require.
should I read out the exact definition of Lord Davis position?
Yes,
So
please.
Lord Davis position is also known as Trendelenburg position with legs apart or head down lithotomy. It is defined as supine positions of the body with hip flexed at 15° as the basic angle and with a 30° head down tilt. The key difference between lithotomy and Lord Davis is the degree of hip and knee flexion. So that is how it is defined.
Yeah. So I think we talked about the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
You sang it.
Sure. Yeah, I think it was a wonderful session. I think you covered everything
Most of
very
it.
well, Dr. Sable. So if there are no other questions, I think with the permission of the president, we can
Yeah, please.
close the session. Yeah.
Rajesh can thank everyone and
Yeah.
especially the moderators for Rajesh.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the moderators, Dr. Radha Verma and Dr.
Kamath.
Manmohan Kamath.
and Dr. Manmohan. I think it's pretty late.
I know it's 10:30.
So,
It's a little
yeah,
drowsy
It was
time.
excellent,
No
uh,
problem.
excellent session.
And
Very nice
Thank
session.
you. Yeah.
Bye,
all the
guys. Good
participants
night.
and their.
Good
Yeah.
night. Thank you.
Yeah,
so much.
thank you.
Way
Thank
beyond,
Thank
way
you.
beyond my
Huge
sleeping
thank you
time.
to all
Bye.
the speakers also for taking time out of
Taking-
their busy schedules and preparing this talk. As you must
Yeah.
have seen, it was not an easy for any professor to make such kind of talks at such short notices, whether it was incision positions or whether it was catheterization, different type, or maybe giving the entire network of daycare surgery. So a huge thank you to all the speakers, the moderators for conducting the sessions. And again, a request to all those who are attending. The next Friday, we are going to have talks on ergonomics in laparoscopy. We are going to have energy devices and then sutures and staplers. So when we send you the brochure, a request that you send it across to all your other friends, your colleagues, your PG students, and your UG students too. Thank you so much, and thank you,
Dr.
presenters, for helping.
Niranjan, one more thing I wanted to say that
Yeah.
today I got a message from one of my ex-student and from Nagpur, and he said that this today's program was appeared in their surgical society.
Yes, I had put it there.
Yeah, you had put it, sir, because he posted it back to me. Excellent.
I've been putting it every session there too.
Good. So the series are
Yes,
becoming
yes.
more and more
Yeah.
wider, popular.
Absolutely, I was surprised, and he said, "No, ma'am, it's in our Nagpur society, surgical society."
Look,
So,
there is a
sir,
message from the Delhi Surgical Society as well. Dr. Rajiv is attending from Delhi Surgical Society.
Yes.
So it is
So
basically
good. I think it's
all,
it's become
yeah.
a national program now.
No, it is better because it is basically for benefit of all.
Yeah.
Soon
Sitting
we'll
at
have
home,
the
we can
people from
revise the surgery.
people from Asia Pacific, Europe, and Australia also will be attending. I think. Great.
yes,
Good show.
No,
Good
no,
show.
I got a with Niranjan's permission, I got a call from the academic convener of ASI, Dr. Santosh John Ibrahim, congratulating all of us for this wonderful series that we have started. And all thanks to Niranjan and Rajesh.
excellent. Yeah,
Hard
very
work.
nice.
Yeah.
Very well
Prashant
done.
wants to speak. Can you somebody unmute Prashant Rao?
Arre Baba, I'm here only. I didn't say.
he's-
No, you raised your hand, Prashant.
Prashant always wants to speak.
Is that
Dr.
another
Qazi
Prashant?
Alam is from Bangladesh. So Manmohan,
Acha, so you are already
We
international.
are already
huh?
international.
International.
Good.
Prashant's
Okay.
hand is everywhere. Don't worry. Whether it is politics, religion, or academics. huh?